Prosecutors say Trump directed illegal hush money to two women.
When during the campaign, I would say Mexico's going to pay for it. Obviously, I never said this, and I never meant they're going to write out a check. They may even write us a check by the time they see what happened.
Mr. President, did you know that Paul Manafort was sharing polling data from your campaign with the Russians?
No, I didn't know anything about it. Nothing about it.
So he denied knowing about the Stormy Daniels payoff. Prosecutors say he did know. He denied saying Mexico would cut a check for the border wall, but he did say that.
Yes, he did.
And he denies knowing Paul Manafort was sharing data with a Russia-linked associate. We're going to leave that fact check to Bob Mueller. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Friday, January 11th. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC and co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, John Heilman, Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst, Susan Del Percio, and Republican communications strategist and MSNBC political contributor, Rick Tyler, is with us as well. Joe, this shutdown, it continues. It's getting painful. People are getting paychecks today with a big fat zero on them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, the government shutdown is an important story. We're going to be talking about that at length this morning, but I don't want any of us to lose sight of what's happening at the same time, what's simultaneously unfolding right before our very eyes. We're watching the continued political, ideological, and moral collapse of my old party, the Republican Party. And then, make no mistake, Donald Trump's governing immorality and amorality is the engine that's driving this collapse and has been driving this collapse for some time. But his Republican allies on Capitol Hill and in powerful positions across America are too eager and too willing to be his accomplices. Take the new Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham. Now, I've known Lindsey for years. We came in together in Congress in 1994, and Lindsey was always considered to be one of the most genial, reasonable, and measured members of Congress. As a presidential candidate in 2016, he routinely warned us of the moral rot that the election of Donald Trump as the party's nominee would bring to the Republican Party. And he said that that unhinged Manhattan developer would destroy the GOP if he were elected. Well, Lindsey was right then. But now he's one of the administration's leading henchmen in hatching plots to run roughshod over our nation's traditions and to turn the Republican Party into a rudderless, unprincipled collection of mini-me Donald Trumps. Can you believe that Lindsey Graham, a guy who, along with me, throughout the 1990s, championed the power of checks and balances, then, of course, then against Bill Clinton. We always talked about Article 1 and the Constitution and being constitutionalist. Well, now, that same Lindsey Graham, who actually followed John McCain's lead for so long, is actually the Republican who's using his position as Senate chairman of the Judiciary Committee to encourage Donald Trump to declare a national emergency and illegally seize Article 1 powers if he doesn't get his way on the border wall. Think about that for a second. And it is illegal. It will be overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States. And if Lindsey doesn't know that, then he really shouldn't even be in Congress. It's that obvious. The courts will overturn this because in the midst of the kind of negotiations that Donald Trump's going through with Nancy Pelosi, it's the first time that this spoiled, pampered brat who inherited $200 million from his father and then blew through it, that brat has now grown up to be president of the United States, and in his 72, 73, I don't know how old he is. How old is he, 73? I'll tell you, yesterday, whoo. But anyway, this is the first time anybody has ever stood up to him. Yeah. And you know what that's called? That's called Madisonian democracy. And it's been the norm in this constitutional republic for 240 years. And that's just been a balance between two co-equal branches of the government. But Lindsey says it's not going Donald's way. So let's just declare a national emergency. We can rob money.
My God.
Of course, from people that are suffering in Puerto Rico. We can rob money from people who are suffering in California. We can rob money from our military men and women, even though the Armed Services Chairman has said that would be deplorable. It is truly deplorable. And if that's not bad enough, the Iowa Republican Congressman Steve King, a man who has long shared a mutual admiration with Donald Trump, spoke his truth in unashamedly declaring himself a white supremacist. Now, in days past, King would have immediately been censured and removed from the Republican conference. But in Donald Trump's GOP, they're just pro forma press releases and tweets of rebuke, because in reality, all King is doing, he's just mirroring the president's views after that deadly march in Charlottesville. And this morning, Steve King remains a member in good standing of the House and the Republican Party. You know, I could go on, but you know,
Yes,
we
you
only
could.
have 3 hours every morning. Conservatives like me can only now watch and wait in horror to see the awful legacy and the moral destruction that Donald Trump is going to have on the party that I once loved and that he hijacked to win the White House. But I can't tell you this today. Trump is leading this horror show. But you know who I hold accountable? Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, Steve King, and all the Republicans on Capitol Hill that are ducking their heads. They are the co-conspirators, complicit by their action or, more importantly, by their silence. The party of Lincoln and the party of Reagan, they're suffering through a massive moral collapse. It is sad and it is dangerous for this country. And I believe it is the beginning of the end of my old party. Willie.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.